right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
I should come up sometime, see me.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
The stuff that dreams are made of.
Hi, Wendy here. Before we start off our episode today, I want to remind everybody to check us out on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. Also, please leave a rating or comment on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. You can find us on social media by simply searching Silver Screen Time Machine, and please make sure you follow our podcast, Silver Screen Time Machine, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you, and enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome again to Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review. Today, I'm here with a guest, Josh Axelrod. Thank you for joining us today, Josh. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm the Pittsburgh Post Gazette's pop culture reporter. I have worked with Wendy multiple times on stories over the past few years. I really appreciate the Classic Movie Club and the fact that there is clearly a thirst for these kind of movies in this city, which I don't know that I would have guessed, but I guess in retrospect makes sense. I'm just happy to be here talking about this particularly insane movie.
Yeah, so you write about pop culture, like you said, in the Post Gazette, so you write a lot about plays, films. Also, you have a lot of great knowledge about that sort of thing. So,
I try.
Yeah, today we're getting in our time machine, and we're going back to 1963, and we are going to talk about...
The Birds.
The Birds, Alfred Hitchcock. So The Birds only nominated for one Oscar.
Special effects, yeah.
Visual effects.
Which is wild considering some of the effects used in that movie, but that's mostly just viewing it through a lens of today. So.
Yeah, we are going to have to sort of... give it a little slack as far as remembering that it was 1963. And I do have some comments on that, critical and praiseworthy. But
Same.
We're going to get to that in a minute. This was produced and directed by the great Sir Alfred Hitchcock. 5-time Oscar nominee, never won an Oscar.
Pretty insane in retrospect.
Yeah,
I mean, the man made Psycho.
Yeah, some of his wonderful films, Rear Window, Rebecca, and Psycho, all among his nominations that he did not win.
Wild.
I found this was an interesting thing I read about Alfred Hitchcock, that he had a phobia of eggs. He was afraid of them.
It's weird to think that he was afraid of anything, considering that all of his movies are about confronting like humanity's greatest fears, and of all the things for him to be afraid of.
Eggs.
I'm trying to think if, do eggs ever play into any of his movies?
I don't think so, but he was very phobic about them, especially ones with runny yolks, and he would not eat any of them if they were by themselves. Maybe if they were in a dish, but not an egg by itself.
I'm with him on my distaste for eggs with runny yolks, but I don't know that I'd call it a fear.
Very afraid, scary. He was also afraid of police, which I think is probably legitimate, but he was so afraid of police that he would not even get a driver's license because he was afraid he would get pulled over and would then be confronted by a policeman.
That might make even more sense about how the policeman in The Birds is placed. That man is someone that nobody should be afraid of, and maybe that's exactly why he crafted him that way.
Yeah, and they say the reason that he was afraid of the police was because for some reason, God only knows what his father was thinking, but for some reason as a child, Hitchcock was sent to the local police station with a letter from his father. I guess he had done some misdeed. And the desk sergeant read the letter and locked him up for 10 minutes and wouldn't let him out. And then he told him, this is what happens to people who do bad things.
And then he spent the rest of his career making movies about what happens to people who do bad things. Somehow it all comes back.
But what a terrible thing. What would you do that for?
Yeah, no, I mean, it certainly is an interesting origin story about a child.
Yeah,
God,
the heck? So the screenplay was written by Evan Hunter. He's known for actually The Birds and High and Low. He didn't have a lot of screenplays to his credit, but he had worked with Alfred Hitchcock previously on his mystery magazine and his Alfred Hitchcock Presents TV series. And basically, Alfred Hitchcock just wanted somebody there to write the screenplay. He wanted to pretty much dictate the screenplay to them.
Yeah, and it was all based off of another story, right? By
Daphne du Maurier.
From my understanding is he had the idea and the structure in his head already.
He always did.
He just wanted a movie that was about random bird attacks.
Yeah, and he wanted somebody else to write it. He didn't want to actually go through the process of doing the writing, but he wanted to tell the story himself. And yes, based on a short story by Daphne du Maurier. He had previously also adapted another work of hers, Rebecca. That was a book she wrote, and he adapted it to his film, Rebecca.
I also feel like I read that it was not based on, but loosely inspired by some series
Yep.
of real-life bird attacks, right?
Yep. The Birds was partially inspired by the true events of a mass bird attack on the seaside town of Capitola
I'm going to say they're all right.
in California on August 18th, 1961, when the residents awoke to a scene that seemed straight out of a horror movie. Hordes of seabirds were dive-bombing their homes, crashing into cars, and spewing half-digested anchovies onto lawns.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I think the reason was some sort of algae infection that they all had.
The birds' behavior was toxic algae.
That's one reason, sure. I mean, Hitchcock never gave a reason for his bird's behavior.
True,
So, I
true.
mean,
So maybe they also had toxic
To be
algae.
fair, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they figured out what was wrong with those birds until many years later.
Yeah,
so
no, it said that wasn't known back in the 1960s.
it's not like the people of Bodega Bay would have really been able to figure out what was going on either.
Yeah,
Makes
correct.
sense
Yeah.
in terms of the time period.
The sound consultant is Bernard Herrmann, which is somebody he used all the time for his scores. He's a 5-time nominee. He did the score on Citizen Kane, actually, and he did North by Northwest, Vertigo, Psycho. But this particular film doesn't really have a score at all. This is just kind of like electronic sounds and screeching and bird sounds.
I'm not sure I clocked a single instance of music, whether it was a song or just
Oh, there is
pure
a song.
score.
There's that
What
weird
am I
little
missing?
children's song.
Oh, excuse
that-
me.
Yeah, don't forget
Excuse
that weird
me.
children's song.
I guess I meant overhead music, but yeah, you're
no,
right.
that's
You're right.
that
There's
song, the longest song on the whole planet. I've never heard of such a long song.
haunting. But no, it's interesting that he used his usual music consultant for a movie that, for all intents and purposes, had no music.
Yeah, I think that was kind of a tip of the hat because he was his buddy and he wanted to put a credit out there for him, I guess. I don't know why they would use him.
For the sake of this podcast, we need instances of Hitchcock being a good guy, so
Yeah, true.
we'll take that one.
Yeah, because there's a lot of instances allegedly of him not being a good guy on this film. It says they commissioned Sala and Remy Gassman to design an electronic soundtrack, and they're credited with electronic sound production and composition.
They did an incredible
Yeah.
job.
Yeah,
That's some of the best ambient noises you'll ever
Yeah,
hear in
it's
a
really
movie.
interesting. Oh, there is some source music. It says Claude Debussy's music. She plays on the piano. I don't remember her playing the piano.
That's a major if you say so.
It says that Tippi Hedren's character plays the piano, and I don't remember her playing the piano.
She must have at Mitch's house at some
Yeah,
point.
she had to have.
That's
And
the
then
only
that-
place that I can remember piano being.
That nickety nackety now 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 song that the children sing. It's by a folk musician called Chubby Parker. So that's what they sing. And you're right. I had another podcast when we did Night of the Hunter, and the guest said anytime children are singing, it's creepy.
I mean, I blame Children of the Corn for all of our creepy associations with children, but it was mostly creepy just because it was so still otherwise. Because
Yes.
usually, even when children are singing in movies, there's some haunting music over it, which I argue makes it less creepy because it reminds you you're watching a movie. Hitchcock did not want to remind you you were
No.
watching a movie, and I think that was playing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
But she was sitting there on the bench, and
And
the
as
birds were massing
those
behind
shot-
her.
Just some incredible editing right there.
Yeah.
Who says that you need to beat your audience over the head with ambiance?
Or terror. And that song just had this little sing-songy nickety neckety, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And you keep thinking, she keeps looking like she thinks the song's going to be over, and then another verse comes and she's like, oh, and she's smoking a cigarette, and all these birds are coming and sitting on the jungle gym behind her, and she's totally unaware. He's very good at suspense. He's the master of suspense.
Yeah, it was one of the brilliant tricks of that movie to make it the bird attacks kind of happening at random intervals. So in a first scene like that, you just have no idea when they're going to actually
they're
swoop
just
in.
sitting there looming.
So yeah, the kids can just sing their song and Tippy can just sit there and you're like, it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, and you just don't
when.
know. You're waiting. Cinematographer on this film, Robert Burks. He is a 4-time Oscar nominee, collaborated again with Alfred Hitchcock a lot. He won an Oscar for To Catch a Thief, which is a Hitchcock film. He also did Vertigo, Rear Window, North by Northwest, and oddly enough, The Music Man. It was kind of sad. This guy was a close personal friend of Alfred Hitchcock, and he wound up dying in a house fire at age 59 caused by falling asleep with a cigarette.
Oh, that's so unfortunate. I didn't know that. There's some incredible landscape shots in this movie.
There are, but I don't think they are on location. I think they are done through special effects.
That's less impressive then.
Yes.
But I assume the cinematographer has to have some say in how final shots are crafted. So I want to give him a little credit here because I remember the scene towards the end where the fire started and there's that overhead shot of just the fire on that one little stretch and chaos kind of happening in the streets. And I assume Hitchcock certainly framed that, but we'll give the cinematographer at least a little credit for making it come to life.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very beautiful shots in the film. I have a little bit of a problem with the extreme use of rear projections. projection that doesn't even look very good at all.
I mean, that's fair.
I'm frustrated with that in 1960. I think we can do better. Hitchcock was a big fan of rear projection, and I think he didn't really evolve with the times. Rear projection is fine maybe in the 40s and 50s, but when you're getting into the 60s, we have better techniques, I think.
It was weird too when they were also like immediately either followed or preceded by scenes that clearly were where they were supposed to be.
Yeah.
But then there was a cut to like, oh, that background looks incredibly fake.
Yes, like when she's on the boat or when she's in the car.
Anything in a car was super weird.
The editor is George Tomasini. He was nominated for North by Northwest. This is another Hitchcock guy. He has his crew. These are his people. He was a master of time and space and editing to heighten suspense and determine mood. So that's why he was so good in these.
That scene we were just talking about where it keeps cutting from
Melanie
yeah.
Daniels.
The scene where Melanie is just hanging out in front of the school and it keeps cutting to and from more and more birds on the jungle gym.
And
That's
then
some pretty
yeah.
slick editing, honestly.
He's really a good editor, and he used all sorts of really fancy editing techniques, especially point of view shots was a big thing that they like to use to make.
Yeah, the more I watch movies, the more I realize that editing has almost as much to do with a movie's success as directing
and the cinematography.
Yeah, so I've been paying extra close attention to editing, and that guy had something. Clearly.
Tomasini, yeah, he's very well known as an excellent editor with Hitchcock. And especially this one had to have been very hard to edit with all these action scenes with the birds and stuff. That could not have been very easy.
Chaos.
So now we'll get into the visual effects. They won the Oscar for. This fellow has a very strange name, of course. His name is Ub Iwerks. But this is a fellow that actually was an animator at Walt Disney Studio. And they used him because he could do this thing called the sodium vapor process that he actually developed himself to use with animation. And I'm not sure I understand it, to be honest. It's a little confusing. It shoots two separate elements of footage simultaneously using a beam splitter and one reel of regular film stock and the other film stock. And I guess they sort of mat them together, which is how they managed to do the scenes with the birds and the people, like the birds attacking the people. I wish I understood it better, that I could explain it in more layman's terms.
I mean, I imagine it was super innovative for its day.
It was very innovative.
I'm just going to float this out now. We can potentially bring it up later, but the effects in this movie are kind of one of the reasons I think this is one of the rare classic movies that is just itching to be remade.
Yeah. It looks dated. At the time, like you said, this was very innovative process. Unfortunately, now it looks quite bad, quite dated. It almost looks like you're back looking at the 1931 Dracula where the bats are on strings, and you kind of forgive that, but you have the same sort of feeling about...
I expect a little bit more from the 60s, just a little bit. I'm just saying, with modern CGI, if you had the right talent in the room, I think you can make a really cool remake of the birds.
Yeah, but it's kind of a sacrilege to remake Hitchcock to me.
It is. This is my only exception. I agree. We don't need to talk about like the Rebecca remake, but this is the only one I would advocate for.
But that, again, like we said, at the time was cutting edge, that particular technique, so that's why he was brought in. A majority of the birds in this film are real. It says more than $200,000 was spent on making mechanical birds, and then there were all these live birds that this fellow had to catch and train. His name was Ray Berwick. He caught and trained all these birds, these seagulls, these crows, these ravens, these sparrows, tons and tons of birds.
I listened to an interview with Rod Taylor where I believe he mentioned the raven or the crow named Archie, who just would not leave him alone.
Attacked him
every day. Rod was like, "Oh, is Archie not working today?" And then suddenly he'd just fly out of the rafters and peck him or something.
Yeah, they said he really disliked him. He kept like attacking him every day.
Said something against
for
this
no
poor
reason.
guy.
Yeah,
but there were multiple times I was watching with my wife last night, and we were both like, "How did they get the birds to do that?"
Yeah.
So this guy, Ray.
That's why I mentioned him.
He's a heck of an asset for this movie.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned him, because I think what he must have done to manage to get these birds to do these things is amazing.
And I will say, to the people who built the mechanical birds, it's not super easy to tell. Honestly, there are some scenes where it's not super easy to tell which are real birds and which are mechanical. So I give him just enough credit. I mean, sometimes it's pretty obvious.
Well,
but there are some moments where I genuinely was wondering.
There are some shots where it looks so ludicrously ridiculous, like when the birds are coming in and he's grabbing them. There's just certain spots. And even when she's in the attic, they said they were actually literally throwing birds at her. I'm like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, we're going to get to that scene.
How many birds were harmed in this film? Like,
we're going to get to everything that was wrong with that scene eventually, I assume.
Yeah, well, we will. So one of the things I thought was amusing about this was apparently when the audience left the UK premiere in London, they actually had these loudspeakers hidden in the trees, and they would scream and screech laughing doing bird sounds to
that's so
terrify
rude.
the audiences.
That's some pretty good viral marketing, I guess.
I mean, like, geez, these poor people have already just been at this horror film that nobody's seen before. It's a premiere, and they're all horrified, and they come out and they hear all these birds.
So this movie came out like, what, a decade or so before Jaws, right?
It's set in 1963.
So something like that. Like, this was the original, here are the things to be afraid of. Don't go into the
Birds.
sky.
You can't go anywhere, can't go outside, can't go in the water.
Yeah, I was about to say, this is even more, I would argue,
Well,
horrifying than Jaws.
You can't even stay inside in this film either. I mean, they come into the thing.
Don't buy a house with a chimney is something I definitely, a lesson I took from
Well,
this.
don't buy a house with a window.
Well, that's a tougher one. But yeah.
So let's get into the plot a little bit. Let's start this whole thing off. So we start out by Melanie Daniels, who is Tippi Hedren. This is one of her first films, first of all. And I don't want to be too critical about anybody that's their first film, but it's obvious to me. I think she's expressionless.
I think, yeah, her face is pretty static, but I will say she does exude this air of superiority.
Yes. She's very good at that.
She's which is what she was asked to do, clearly.
Yeah.
And when she has to be horrified, she certainly is good at that. I'm sure she learned later in her career to get her face to do different things.
Like I said, it's her first experience.
He
Give
plucked
her a little bit
plucked her out of a commercial, right? She was a model before this.
Yeah, I don't think she had any real acting experience.
Well, she also ended up being the matriarch of an acting dynasty.
Well, yes,
so
true.
It's still,
That is
still
true.
ongoing one.
Yeah.
I didn't realize she was Melanie Griffith's mom before.
You didn't realize
before
that?
Before I rewatched it.
Oh my gosh.
Dakota Johnson's
Yeah.
grandmother. I
Yeah,
mean,
and still I think she's still with us.
I think so too. We like Tippi. No, she's been a great figure in Hollywood and continues to be. But she did her best.
Yeah,
for this one.
she did. But yeah, you could tell she's an experienced actress.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way. Like you said, she is very snooty. It's almost to the point of being very annoying in the beginning. And she's in this bird place trying to buy this bird. You're going to have this bird theme just throughout. Even in the beginning, it's already starting. She's trying to get a bird. She's trying to acquire a bird. And she runs into Rod Taylor. He's playing this prank on her, treating her like the sales lady. And she's asking for some lovebirds. And then they get into a spat. They find out that she did some sort of a prank. Apparently, she's this spoiled rich girl that likes to go around doing pranks. And apparently, he's a lawyer that had to defend somebody in one of her pranks or something along those lines. And he doesn't like her, but she's all intrigued by him.
I did appreciate that this is Hitchcock's idea of what a screwball comedy looked like. Because in my research, it seemed like his goal was to start off in the screwball comedy mode. And then when the horror strikes, in his mind at least, that was going to make everything even more suspenseful and horrifying.
Yeah,
but,
you have this conflict between the sexes, very screwball comedy-like.
I think they had their moments. I think those two had some chemistry in some scenes. I don't think all of it worked. The first time I saw this movie was at a drive-in, and I just remembered it being funny in all the wrong ways. I was able to take it a little bit more seriously this time. I'll say that.
Yeah, I like Rod Taylor as an actor. I mean, he's not the best actor in the world, but he's good.
He was suave and smarmy in all the ways he was supposed to be, and then when he had to be an action hero, I thought he pulled it off pretty well.
And he's an Australian who does a very good American accent. He's almost unrecognizable as being Australian because he has such a good American accent. He does American accents on many of his films. But she's intrigued by this behavior of his and runs after him, finds out his license plate number, finds out who he is, and goes through all this big rigmarole. Obviously, she has a little crush on him because why else would you do all this?
I just want to take a side note that I love that they just say that her dad's this big newspaper publisher. They never say what the newspaper is. They never say exactly who he is, but apparently he has the ability to get her any information at any time that she needs it.
Yeah.
She might have wanted to use that a couple other times in this movie, but I love that she used it just to prank this guy that she clearly had a little crush on.
Yeah. So he had been in the store saying these lovebirds were for his sister, and she winds up buying the lovebirds, and she goes to deliver them to his apartment. This guy tells her, oh, he's out of town. He's in this other place, Bodega Bay. The thing that I am amazed by in this film is how much free information people give out about other people in this film. Just tell everybody where they live, their names, their whereabouts. I'm like, okay, this wouldn't happen, I don't think, in today's day and age.
I think it made sense for the Bodega Bay residents, because in my, at least, experience in small towns, that makes a lot of sense. Weirder for the guy in San Francisco who had no idea who she was, who was like, here's everything you know about where this man is right now. This, strange woman with these birds. Here's where to find him. Have fun. Go forth.
Yeah, it's just like, here, all this information about however you want. So then
Neighbors, man.
She decides this is when you get that driving scene where when they show the front view, the rear projection is so bad. But when they show the back view of the car, you have this very beautiful matting. And this is where I think they did use some of this sodium vapor process to put this matting in the back of this particular scene. And it looks very pretty. So I would alternate between being like, oh, and being like, oh, because it kept going from front view, back view, front view, back view.
Yeah, it just would have been nice if there was a little more consistency in each scene. Like, just pick one per scene. Like, you can use multiple techniques per movie, but yeah, maybe.
Well, don't use the rear projection.
Yeah, it probably could have also shaved maybe 10 minutes off this movie with driving scenes alone, for being honest.
He really enjoys having those close-up shots of her face. They said that he had a little thing for her and he made a pass at her.
I was going to say Marnie sounds like was not a great second experience for both of them together based on the research.
Apparently. And she alleges that part of the reason that he was being vindictive about sending all these birds after her or whatever, like actually trying to sort of hurt her because she had spurned his advances. That's what
she got injured pretty badly during the phone booth scene, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Then that's what she had stated. She believed that was the reason. So
welcome to Hollywood, kid.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, you and I weren't there. We'll never know. But, that's what her version was. So she gets into this bodega bay and she goes to the postmaster. And then right away, he tells her every single thing about these people. And he directs them right to their house and all this stuff. And she goes to see this school teacher played by Suzanne Plachette.
I would argue this movie's Secret Weapon.
She was a big TV star. She was in the Bob Newhart show. She played the wife. I like her character, Annie Hayworth. I like the school teacher character. I thought she did a really nice job, actually.
She's a spitfire. Once they unspool her backstory, it makes way more sense about how someone like that ended up at Bodega Bay.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, she kind of was a good foil to Melanie's stoicism, I guess, because she was a little more vivacious and lively. And it's kind of interesting that Melanie might have a type, but I don't know that Mitch does. Because I don't think those two have much in common. But I still lured them both to Bodega Bay.
Yeah, I like her. I like her acting. I like the job she did. I like her character. Melanie winds up going to her first to find out the name of the sister. And then she's right away on high alert. We find out down the road a little bit, she has this scene with Melanie where she tells her that she used to date Mitch. Mitch is Rod Taylor's character. She used to date Mitch and it didn't work out because the mother, who is played by Jessica Tandy, another really great performance and a really great actress. I really enjoy her. She plays Lydia. That's the mother. She's excellent in this film. But anyhow, she goes and she leaves the lovebirds in the house. She rents this boat and she goes across the bay. Yeah, again, she just walks into his house, puts this birds down and leaves, gets back on her little boat where you get more of that horrible rear projection that I despise.
But the best part is that she sticks around just close enough to
watch his reaction. Yeah,
but just close enough and that he can clearly see her. I don't know, which I assume she was trying
to be seen, yes. Yeah. He goes in and he saves the birds and he runs out of the house and he runs all the way around the bay to go find her. And she's crossing the bay. As she's crossing the bay, this bird comes and attacks her and whacks her in the head.
I'm not going to lie, that was kind of funny. I hate to admit it, but I felt bad for Melanie and probably Tippy too, because Lord knows what she went through in this movie. Yeah. That shot was kind of funny.
Yeah.
There's some unintentional comedy in this movie. Yeah. Just mostly looking back, in hindsight, but it gets scarier. Than that, that's for sure. Yeah,
so he gets worried because she just got hit by this bird and they're like, what's going on here, whatever. So then they talk, and then he invites her for dinner. She makes up this big ridiculous story that she's friends with Annie, the school teacher, for whatever reason. She doesn't want him to think that she's come down there just for him. So she makes up this big, huge, ridiculous lie, which he obviously knows is a lie. And so she has to then go and rent the room from Annie, who then Annie has that conversation down the line with her about how she used to be with Mitch.
And we also find out later from Lydia that her name was in the papers a lot, I guess, in gossip columns, like in the columns, I think was what Lydia said, which is a wonderful old-timey newspaper phrase for some fun thing she did in Rome, apparently.
Running around naked in a fountain.
There was no reason at all for her to lie and pretend like she'd ever been to Bodega Bay, when she's kind of more of a public figure, I think, than any of us realized up until that point.
And you can tell in the film that he is not buying her lie anyway. He's just going along with her, like humoring her almost. So she winds up coming for dinner with the family, and then...
I just wanted to point out about this scene that you get a very 60s moment where I believe they're talking about the people Mitch defends, and Kathy, the little girl played by, I believe, Veronica Cartwright, just calls them hoods on multiple occasions.
Yes, hoods. She does say that. She says, my brother hangs around with hoods or something like that. Again, Lydia there, you don't really know exactly what's wrong with her, but you clearly can sense that like Jessica Tandy does a really nice job of portraying this character with some sort of emotional problem, but you can't quite put your finger on what exactly is wrong with this lady.
Yeah, I mean, obviously overprotective, but there's an underlying reason for it.
But not loving. Not overprotective because you love them, because she clearly seems to have not that much affection for the kids.
It's more of an overdependence on Mitch, at least. Yes. Definitely. Kathy, I don't quite understand what her relationship with Kathy was.
Well, you see in several times when there's a crisis or something, she just pays no attention to the kids.
There are multiple scenes, I believe, of Lydia just pressed up against the wall while the birds attack, not helping anyone else. Not even helping herself, really. Yeah. Just kind of like totally inert.
Yeah, but not at all what you would expect from a mother. You know, you'd think they'd go and protect their child before they would worry about themselves.
Pretty clear that Mitch has had to take care of both his
Yes.
mother and sister, and the age difference between Mitch and his sister is fascinating.
Yes, it's very
There's a
different.
story there that wasn't told either, but that's for another
Because she
movie,
had her
I guess.
husband. Well, anyway, she says the husband died. We don't know how long. It's not really explained how long ago. I mean, I guess since the daughter was born, but yeah, we don't really know. And then she's acting very not nice to. She's not especially warm to Melanie. Doesn't seem to really want her there.
It's wild, by the way, that Annie stuck around. If Lydia also acted that way towards her when Mitch brought her around, I guess she just fell in love with the neighborhood so much, which it's beautiful. I get it, but I don't know that I'd want to be in proximity to my ex and my ex's mom if
She
she acted
said
like
she
that.
originally came to follow Mitch, to be by Mitch, but why did she stay on? I guess she just maybe she.
This movie's just full of unanswered questions,
we
which isn't
never
necessarily
know.
a bad thing. It's just
They
food
let
for
you.
thought.
They let you make your own decisions. At some point, she goes back, and when she goes back home, I think is when she has the talk with Annie about Mitch and the mother and what's wrong with Lydia. And also, one of the things that was happening when she was at the dinner was she was calling the chicken feed place and saying that her chickens weren't eating. That's the first thing that's
Some pretty
odd.
solid foreshadowing.
Yeah.
You know, the movie's called The Birds. I don't know that we needed that much foreshadowing.
Yeah.
But I respect what Hitchcock was going for with
Yeah.
that scene. It was actually, this might sound weird, but that was one of the best phone acting I've ever seen.
Yes,
Like
I
Jessica
agree.
Tandy on the phone. I was like, oh, that seemed like a phone call.
No, I agree. I actually thought that too. And the way she kept getting interrupted, and she would just stop and be interrupted by this guy when he was, I guess, telling her that this other fellow also had the same problem, but was a totally different feed.
Yeah, one of my movie pet peeves is when it's obviously a fake phone call and someone forgets to say goodbye before they hang up, or just things like that you don't do in a phone call.
Yeah.
Jessica Tandy clearly had worked a phone before. I respect it.
She's really good. And I guess we should mention that she is an Oscar winner.
Oh, yeah, she's
She won.
probably the most famous person in retrospect in that movie.
Yeah, she won for obviously driving Miss Daisy when she was much older, of course, and she also was nominated for Fried Green Tomatoes. Yeah, so all the sequences of the birds, I can't always remember exactly what sequence it is because there's just so many different bird attacks that I'm never sure when did each bird. But at some point, the birds come into the house, but I feel like it's before they go find that guy.
Yeah, my recollection is
It
she
happened
gets hit by the
first.
bird. She goes to the restaurant. Then they have dinner. Then I believe the next day was Kathy's birthday party. And that's when the birds attack the kids. And then when all of the other guests are gone and it's just the four of them in the house, then
The birds come into
down
the
the chimney.
But that is before she goes to that farm to discover that guy.
I think that's the next day when
Okay.
she goes to figure out what's
'Cause
happening there, and then she
That's
sees the most
very
horrifying.
That's very gruesome.
Most gruesome thing in the movie.
Yeah, because you have this person sitting there with his eye pecked out, and they give you a nice shot of it. Like they don't, don't shy away from showing you that.
No, I mean, it's pretty good makeup effects, too,
Yeah.
for,
Oh, yeah.
for the 60s.
Yeah, so Lydia goes to check on this guy. She wanted to ask him about his chickens. Dan Fawcett, I think, is this person's name. He's
Felt bad
never
for
really
that
in
poor
the film.
farmhand who had to figure out why she ran out of that house screaming.
Yeah, this lady cannot take anything. She is very emotionally overwrought. So she comes back and she's all upset. And now they're starting to get the sheriff involved, and he's kind of like doesn't believe anything they're saying.
Well, yeah, when they first call him after the initial bird attack in the house, the sheriff is like, I don't know that I call this an attack. When you look around and there's just
Everything's trashed.
everything's broken, and the four of them all have the same story. It's not like it's one of them who is like, it's a bird attack, and the others are like, well, I don't know. And they're all 100% sure what happened.
Yeah.
And this guy is just like, I don't know, I wasn't there. It could have been anything.
He doesn't seem like he's very interested in his job.
I like that Hitchcock, who clearly has trauma with policemen, made a police officer who was just absolutely like inept and
Didn't care.
Did not care.
Yeah.
Until he found a man whose eyes had been pecked out.
But wasn't he saying that he thought it could have been like a burglar or something? Like, why would a burglar? He said, we think maybe he was robbed and murdered. And they said, well, why were there birds lying all around? And he said, well, we think the birds got in after. Okay.
There's a very good SNL sketch from a couple years ago with John Mulaney as the police officer, and Kate McKinnon's playing the Tippi Hedren character, and she calls him and is like, the birds are attacking. And he's like, tell me in excruciating detail exactly what you're talking about. And it escalates from there. There are turtles with knives. It's a really funny sketch. But yeah, I think Mulaney's take on the police officer was like, this is not the time for skepticism. Birds are attacking. Yeah. Do something.
Yeah, especially when you've heard it numerous times now and you just keeps continuing to dismiss it. So the next thing that happens is now Lydia and Melanie are in the house together. Melanie's trying to take care of Lydia because she's, having a shock. And they get a little bit of a talk. And then Lydia's so worried about what's going on with the daughter, Kathy. Yeah, she's like, well, is Kathy okay? She says it numerous times. So Melanie goes, and this is when Melanie goes to get her from the school.
Jessica Tandy monologue when she's in bed is probably the best acting in the movie. I think that's pretty safe to say.
I think Jessica Tandy in this movie is by far the best actor. I mean, she's amazing in this film.
It's a weirdly controlled performance for how much overacting she does, but I think she dials it up when she needs to. But then when she has that heart-to-heart with Melanie, you really feel that there is something wrong with this woman, but she just wants her family to stay together.
Yeah.
You feel more for her, but you also, again, I listened to that monologue and was like, Annie, you ran and you should have ran farther. But
yeah, she is amazing in the film. So Melanie goes to get the daughter from the school, and this is where we were talking about before when she goes in and they're singing this weird song, this tickety-tockety, now, now, now. I mean, it goes on and on like that. And she goes to sit outside a bench outside the schoolyard because, birds are attacking everywhere. So the first place you want to go is outside, right? And
there's
sit
a
on
lot
bench.
of instances of people hanging out outside way longer than you should right after bird attacks.
Yes. What are you doing outside?
Which
Stay indoors.
I guess they do figure out pretty quickly that there's no way to really
escape them
or figure out when they're going to attack. So they know there are safe intervals, but also they don't know how long those are going to last.
True.
So humans are weird is I think Hitchcock's thesis, and they'll do irrational things.
So she sits on this bench. She's smoking the cigarette. And like we said, as she's smoking, we can see first there's just some birds on the jungle gym. There's some more birds, and then some more.
Also
and then
extremely funny.
Covered in birds. And some of these birds here are like cloth, dolls, paper. I mean, there's one or two that obviously there's some real ones because they show some of them flapping around, but a lot of these are very fake birds, not even the mechanic birds.
That's why that's another, again, great editing and extremely good in terms of suspense, but also very funny, if I'm being honest. It's just like, oh, LOL, the birds keep increasing. I get what's happening here. That was one of the few moments where I think her face actually showed genuine horror when she realized it. So at first she's frustrated that the song is going on and on. She's smoking her cigarette. She's waiting for the song to get over, and it never seems to end. It's a very long song. And then a bird flies past, and then she looks back and sees all these birds, and she's like, she doesn't scream, but she runs into the schoolhouse. Great aerial tracking shot of that one bird as it goes to the jungle gym, and then she's like, oh, it's now time for me to do something. Yeah, so she runs into the schoolhouse and she tells Annie, we got to get the kids out of here. And this is when they have that scene where all the kids and they're all running down the thing and the birds are attacking them as they're going. There's also some rear projection on that as well as the sodium vapor process, I think. They did both. That was probably the fakest looking bird attack in the whole movie, honestly,
they said that at some point they had to have the kids running on treadmills and then rear projecting the birds as well and throwing birds at them. And it's too bad. I mean, it is. It's too bad they didn't have better technology.
Just saying. They were going to remake this movie about 15 or so years ago, I think, before they called it off. I'm ready for a Birds remake. I'm just saying we could do it and get like Ari Aster or Jordan Peele on it. I'm just saying.
Well, the call to action.
That's what I'm here for.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to that happening. So anyhow, they wind up getting the kids away. They get in a car and they're hiding in the car, Melanie and Kathy and some other little girl. They wind up making their way back to the house or whatever. Then she goes to this restaurant. She's trying to tell them, look, this is what's happening. These birds are attacking the children. And they have this lady, this bird expert lady there that's like telling them, this is not possible at all. And she's really annoying. She's a really annoying lady.
I don't know what Hitchcock was thinking there. I mean, again, there's some unintentional comedy in this movie, and that lady just randomly being an ornithologist.
I mean, he does put deliberate comedy in his films too.
True.
So she may have actually been put in for a comic.
Yeah, I guess my thought was that when the screwball comedy ended, I thought we were going pure horror, and then it was a little jarring, I guess, just to see her. I mean, she was giving a committed ornithological performance.
She was probably lecturing.
Yeah, the juxtaposition was odd, but you know what? I wasn't mad that she was there.
Yeah, no, he does do stuff like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if he did put her in for comic effect.
She's not the only one in that scene who's there for seemingly comic effect.
Well, what about that guy that keeps yelling Bible verses? It's the end of the world! He's like a Scottish guy or something. Yeah, that guy too. That's what I'm saying. I think he did that deliberately to sort of add in a little bit of comedy.
And especially considering what comes next. Yeah, it was good that there was a moment to cut the tension a little bit.
Yeah, because this is that scene that you were talking about earlier where some of the people go out and then because this guy gets attacked at the gas station and as he gets attacked by the birds he falls over and the gas pump, which is still spilling gas, goes on the ground and all this gas starts rolling towards the building, rolling towards the
Chekhov's
car.
gas.
Yeah, and it's very dramatic the way they show the rolling gas. And Melanie's in there with her expressions of horror her main expression is horror and nothing. Then, of course, there's this fellow that's getting out of his car just about to light a cigar. And they're like, don't throw your match. And of course, what does he do?
To be fair, I think he got hit by a bird, but at the same time, you shouldn't be lighting up a cigarette when you're clearly He was like this almost ankles deep in a foot of gas. So I don't really know. I mean, I think in the 60s, everyone knew how combustion worked, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
But you'd think even you'd be able to smell the gas anyway, even if you weren't standing in it. But regardless, so of course, a huge fire lights up and it goes all the way up back to where the filling station was. That explodes. The birds are flying around, attacking everybody. Everybody's running around. This is when she gets stuck in the phone booth.
Still unclear why anyone left the restaurant.
Yeah.
That seems silly.
Why do they keep leaving?
Once again, I know windows don't protect you from birds, but they definitely protect you more than nothing.
Than being outside.
and I know a lot of them are huddled in the back, but there were just enough people who left where I was like, guys,
Yeah, what are you doing?
You know where this is coming from. There's only one way you can do this. Have something over your head.
Yes, it is very strange. And then she goes in the phone booth, and then they have this big scene with the phone booth where the birds keep trying to come. And I could have probably had a little bit less time on that phone booth scene. I thought that was a little bit long.
I don't remember why did she leave the restaurant again? I don't even remember.
I think she was trying to go out and assist for some strange reason. I don't know why. Well, the reason why some of them left in the beginning was to assist the guy that was getting packed at the filling station. Right. But yeah, I have no idea why I think she went out to try to assist.
Then Mitch somehow saved her, as he always does.
Yeah, Mitch has to keep coming and saving.
I mean, she's a damsel in distress for the second half of the movie.
Yeah, exactly. But it's actually better than the snooty creature she's in the beginning of the movie, to my opinion. But yeah, I like her better the second half. Now it's hard to continue to be a naysayer when that just happened right in front of everybody. Then they wind up going back to the house, and now they're trying to board up the whole house.
Well, real quick, before we get back to the house, I just wanted to shout out this scene back at the restaurant where, again, they go back and see all the people hiding there.
Yeah.
And then there is that mother of the two kids.
I hate that mother.
Yeah, who earlier, she was the one who was telling everyone, keep your voices down, you're scaring my kids. And then she comes out and is like, what's going on? This only happened when you came here. And just screams
called her evil
in her face. It reminded me a lot of The Mist, like the Marcia Gay Harden character in that movie. Just the one hysterical person who is like, I am going to take this moment to make everyone else's life more miserable. Yeah. I just wanted to shout out that was, I don't know that I call that good acting, but it was memorable.
Yeah.
So whoever that was, your performance lives on like 60 years later.
I think I might know. Nope, I don't have the lady that was screaming.
I just needed to shout her out because, again, I wasn't prepared for that moment. I didn't remember it, and I was like, that was loud.
And they slapped her.
You're here, and I need you down here.
Yes, yeah. She slaps her, and she shuts up. And then they go back to the house, and they try to block off the whole house. And then again, you have another attack bird scene where, well, but wait, do they?
Is this before or after they stumble across Annie's dead body?
I know, I was just thinking that too. I
imagine it's they get to the house after that.
I think they do. I think first they're coming down the road.
Well, they didn't have Kathy yet. Yeah, because Kathy was in the house.
Yeah, they went to go get Kathy from Annie's house. That's what they left there and went to go get Kathy from Annie's house and take her home. And when they get there, they see Annie, and that's the worst part for me because I really like that character, and I was like, no, not Annie. I really like her. And then of course
Wendy's like, take Melanie instead.
Yeah,
Annie has more facial expressions.
I kind of did think that, but and then she could get together with Mitch at the end. That would have been nice.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, now I know. I kind of would have rather had it go that way.
That's my rom-com.
Yeah, and plus then you hear too that the little girl tells them that Annie had pushed her inside and saved her life.
Honestly, I didn't think Veronica Cartwright was amazing in that movie, but that scene, like in the back of the car, I felt her terror.
Yeah.
That was pretty solid.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Annie's dead. He takes her into the house. They go back to the house. They start boarding up the house, and then the birds come attacking. And you get a lot of weird scenes here with the birds. They're coming in the window, and it doesn't look very realistic.
There is a prolonged sequence where Mitch is desperately trying to grab the latch, and there are birds pecking at him. And it doesn't look like those are birds.
No, that's what I was thinking of. It looks very unrealistic.
That was not one of his better close-ups.
No, it looks very unrealistic.
What was way more effective was the birds pecking through the wood.
Yes.
When you don't really see them,
no,
but you see the little slits in the wood.
That's more scary.
Sometimes it's scarier when you don't actually see the monster.
Yeah.
And that's one of those times where it's like, oh, even the walls might cave in this house.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I find it more scary and suspenseful when you see the birds pecking, and they're almost through, and then, that's
it's also
a
worth
more
mentioning
scary.
that none of the women do anything in this scene. It's all Mitch continuing to keep the birds at bay.
Yeah, and they're all cowering in the corners, and he's grabbing them up and forcing them to sit in chairs chairs. And I'm like, well, what does it matter if they're sitting in a chair? I never understood why he thought maybe to try to get them
not
more,
his best use of energy, but
like maybe to try to get them in a frame of mind of not being so terrified, I guess. I don't know.
I give him the benefit of the doubt just because he was doing literally everything else.
Yeah, he was like Superman, Rod Taylor. Yeah, so sexy. Here's another part. Finally, the birds stop. They go away. And then what on earth is Melanie doing? Like, seriously. Why on earth would she hears this fluttering. So what does she do? I hear a fluttering. We know that birds are dangerous. So what I'm going to do is go find out where this fluttering is and open the door.
So my question is, by the 60s, like, were audiences smart enough to do the don't go in there thing? Were there examples at that point, I have to assume, of this is silly movie logic?
I'm sure. I mean, I think almost any horror film out there has that. I mean, I think that's part of a horror film.
It's a classic trope. Yeah. So I don't know. I did expect Hitchcock to be a little smarter.
Yeah. I was
like,
what is she doing? Why is she going up? She hears the flapping, so she goes upstairs to find out where this flapping's coming from.
And we've established that Melanie's not stupid. She might be a little vapid, but I don't think she's an idiot. And she tries to wake Mitch up.
Well, she tries by saying, Mitch.
Yeah, she tries very half-heartedly to wake Mitch up, and is like, no, I can do this myself. And then quickly realizes that she cannot do that
so she goes
herself.
upstairs and she opens the door, and she sees there's this big hole in the ceiling, and as she opens the door, you see all these birds. And of course, she walks in the room, the first thing she does is lean back against the door and close the door so she can't get back out, so she's leaning against the door, and the birds are like...
She locks herself in the room, which isn't super smart.
The birds are like dive-bombing her.
But so this is the scene we have to talk about, because correct me if I'm wrong, this is the one where Tippi Hedren alleged that she got to the set that day, thought those were going to be mechanical birds, but then at the last minute was told, no, actually we're going to throw a bunch of real birds at you.
Yeah, they threw birds at her.
So that was a real bird attack that we watched, basically. So I mean,
I think some of it was makeup. I don't necessarily think she had all those cuts on her face.
No, I'm sure it was embellished, but there were more real birds than mechanical birds, I think, used in that sequence. And we can definitely talk all we want about how silly the character's decision-making was, but we got to give Tippi credit. I'm sure that it was much harder for an actress to say no back then, but she did it.
Oh, especially
did multiple times, apparently.
Your first movie to the great Alfred Hitchcock. Yeah, I imagine that would be pretty difficult.
And we don't know if this is before or after the sexual harassment started.
Yeah, that's true. We don't know that either.
So we don't know. The power dynamics might have already gotten really problematic, but that scene is just, it's a little silly until you realize those are real birds.
Yeah. She wound up being really a big fan of wild animals and stuff. She had lions in her house, so obviously she's not afraid of things, I guess. Yeah, again, we have Mitch eventually comes and rescues her. And I don't know that I want to go too much further into it, because then we're going to do spoilers about the ending, and we don't do spoilers here. But I will say there's one scene at the very end that I think looks very beautifully done, the way it's shot with all the birds and the sort of light coming down from the clouds. I really enjoy that particular visual.
Yeah, the lighting during that ending sequence, I think, is pretty spectacular. I imagine that's, again, a combination of cinematographer, director. So we don't have to talk about the ending, but I will say another reason that this could use a remake is I understand why he did what he did at the ending. I would like a slightly more concrete ending. And I don't even need answers to why the birds were attacking. I just want a little more resolution with the particular family. Yeah. That's all.
And there was actually an alternate ending drawn up. It just was never shot. I guess he didn't like it, but we can't really talk about it.
It's a hell of an ending shot. I'll give him that.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, there are some very beautiful shots in this film.
And who am I to second guess Alfred Hitchcock? To be clear, all I can do is backseat drive 60 years later.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're here for.
Exactly.
Do you have any other thoughts on the film?
It's a movie that I, again, had trouble taking seriously the first time, which, again, I'm glad that we had this conversation that forced me to revisit it and forced me to do some of that background research, because this is one of those movies that if you really know how it's made and you know some of the stories behind how people were cast and the actual act of creating a bird attack, you gain a lot more respect for it upon subsequent viewing. So, I would definitely say that this one requires a little bit more homework, but I'm not even a tremendous amount. And the movie itself is pretty well paced. I was actually surprised by how quickly it went by. And once again, I don't know what Jordan Peele and Ari Aster are up to, but somebody with the ability to make a socially conscious modern Birds remake, I'm just going to say it again, this one's just itching for it, and it's right there.
Yeah.
So all yours. That idea is free.
Part of the thing of having this podcast is to give people information so they can understand the backstory of these films a little bit better. So maybe they can take another look at a film that they dismissed previously.
To be clear, I know it's sacrilege to advocate for remakes of movies like this. This is the only one that I can think of that just is so clearly tailored for for more. And we didn't even talk about The Birds too, and that's probably for the best.
Yeah. And here on Silver Screen Time Machine, we do a star rating, 1 to 5. And since you're our guest, we will let you go first. What is your rating on this film, 1 to 5?
I would say the first time I watched it was probably a 3, and that might have been being generous. But again, with a little bit more knowledge going into it, I can bump it up at least a half a star. I think that's one of the things that makes this movie the most interesting to talk about in terms of Hitchcock's oeuvre. I always pronounce that word wrong. It's not his best.
Yeah.
It's not his worst. But it's arguably his most interesting. And so, yeah, I think I'm going to go with 3.5 for The Birds.
Yeah, I also will say 3.5. This is one of my least favorite Hitchcock films. I will tell you that.
Fair.
I think Hitchcock could do better, especially at this time and age. I think he could have done better with the technology even they had in the 1960s.
I'm sorry that when you asked me to do a Hitchcock episode with you, I chose one of your least favorite.
I know, and I did try to sort of. But are you sure that's the one you want?
But, oh no, I knew what you were doing.
Yeah,
but I gotta say,
that's okay.
Like I said, there are definitely better movies to have talked about, but I think in terms of a podcast, it's way more interesting to talk about flawed movies. Yeah, no,
anyway, I'm not critiquing you from your movies. I think there are some good things in this film. There are some beautiful shots from the cinematographer. There are some good acting performances. Jessica Tandy specifically was very excellent in this film. It is interesting. It's not a boring film. It's suspenseful. It's entertaining. So
low-key funny.
Yeah, there's funny parts. Yeah, even also parts that are not supposed to be funny that are funny.
We just spent the whole time talking about how perfect like Psycho and North by Northwest are, but I think this is a much more interesting, way to look at Hitchcock and way to look at how movies were made in circa the early 60s.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyhow, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We really appreciate you being our guest today.
Thanks for having me. This is a lot of fun. I hope somebody out here hears this and takes my free ideas to heart.
I hope so too. You got to get it out there on the internet. All right. So from Silver Screen Time Machine, Wendy's Classic Film Review, this is Wendy saying goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast today. Please don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And please leave us a comment or a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Intro and outro music composed by Heidi Engel. Artwork by Tyler Birch. Produced and edited by Wendy Whittick. Recorded at PCTV Studios, Pittsburgh, PA. See you next time.